some things, they have this timeless quality to them. Like you read a classic novel or you hear a song that's been around forever, and it hits you in this really deep place. And that's kind of what we're getting into today, this idea of the seven deadly sins. You guys sent in some fascinating stuff for this deep dive, YouTube transcripts, articles, you name it. We've got Bible stories, Lion of Judah, even a piece from Pyros that really made me think.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it, how a concept that's been around since, the early days of Christianity still holds so much weight.
Right. It's like we're still trying to unpack these things all these centuries later. So, for anyone just tuning in, we're talking lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and of course, pride. And what really struck me going through these sources is how they're described. Like it's not just about what you do, it's about what's going on inside.
Absolutely.
Hey, eyes for pride. That one stuck with me. I think that was from the Bible Stories video.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And then there's that line from the Lion of Judah video. They describe wrath as, and I love this, feet that are quick to rush into evil. It's like, boom, right there in the image, you get that sense of impulsivity.
That lack of control, that quickness to judge or get angry, it really gets at the heart of it, doesn't it? These vices, they start within us, in our thoughts and intentions, before they ever become actions.
And speaking of intentions, we can't ignore the word deadly here. I mean, it's right there in the name. But the Kairos article, they brought up a really interesting point. They talk about these sins being capital sins.
Yes, that's an important distinction. Deadly speaks to the spiritual danger, for sure. But capital, it comes from the Latin caput, meaning head.
Okay, so like the head of the snake?
In a way, yes. Think of them as the source, the headwaters from which other sins flow. It's not necessarily that these seven are inherently worse than any other sin.
More like they're the root system.
Exactly. They're the driving force behind so many of our wrongdoings.
Mm.
And that same article, it goes on to talk about blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, the one unforgivable sin.
Right, right.
And what it boils down to is this continual refusal to acknowledge and repent, a hardening of the heart against turning away from those very behaviors that these seven often give rise to.
So it's less about labeling these seven as like unforgivable in themselves and more about looking inward and recognizing those tendencies in ourselves.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This isn't about judgment, it's about understanding. Understanding why these vices are considered so detrimental, not just to us as individuals, but to our relationships, our communities.
Right, the ripple effect. And to really dig into the why, we've got to go back to like the source, right? I mean, there's no seven deadly sins pamphlet handed out in Sunday school.
No. But the Kairos article does a fantastic job of tracing the history, how we got to this formalized list. They give credit to Pope Gregory III back in the 6th century. But even he was drawing on earlier theological works, guys like Evagrius Ponticus.
So it was a collaboration across the ages.
Exactly. And while you might not find the exact phrase seven deadly sins in the Bible, the behaviors, the thought patterns, they're all there. Take greed, for example. The Bible Stories channel, they highlight that story of Ananias and Sapphira from the book of Acts, lied about their wealth, and, let's just say greed and deceit. They don't usually end well.
And that whole internal intention thing, it's all over the Gospels. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Talk about a gut check.
Right. It's not just about what we do outwardly, but about the state of our hearts and minds.
It really makes you wonder. What is it about these specific vices, that give them that extra oomph, that make them so, potent?
Well, what's interesting is even though they show up in different ways, lust, gluttony, pride, envy, you name it, there's a common thread. They all point to this inward turn, this putting yourself above everything else.
It's like that self-centeredness kind of, creates blinders. You stop seeing the needs of others, the bigger picture, maybe even, like you said, something beyond yourself.
Exactly. And that's where idolatry comes in. Because when we put our own desires, whether it's stuff, pleasure, even needing other people to think we're great, when we elevate those things, we make them idols. We're saying this is more important than my relationship with the divine, whatever that looks like for each of us.
And that's when these vices really take hold, right?
Yeah.
The Bible Stories video, they use King Solomon as an example. And the guy had it all, wealth, wisdom, power, but he still fell for these traps.
He's the poster boy for it can happen to anyone. And it's heartbreaking when you see how it unfolds. The Bible talks about his wives, all these different women with their own beliefs and how it ends up leading him astray. He starts worshiping other gods, turning his back on the very God who blessed him.
It's a reminder that none of us are immune to this stuff, no matter how wise or strong we think we are. So if these sins are so deeply rooted in us, if they're so darn tempting, how do we even start to fight back?
That's where the seven heavenly virtues step in. They're like the counterbalance. So humility instead of pride, charity instead of greed, temperance for gluttony. It's about making a conscious effort to choose a different path.
It's like we're building up our spiritual immune system, right? Strengthening those defenses against those not so great impulses. But let's be real, we all mess up sometimes. This isn't about being like perfectly virtuous all the time, is it?
Definitely not. It's not about being superhuman, but about recognizing our humanity. The Lion of Judah video, they told this parable about a tax collector and a Pharisee that really got me thinking.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. The Pharisees in the temple totally full of himself, bragging about how great he is. And then there's a tax collector who everyone sees as a sinner, right? He's just standing there, head bowed, asking for forgiveness.
Powerful image, right? And of course, it's the tax collector, the one who admits his flaws, who ends up being justified. It reminds us that it's not about appearances. It's not about announcing how good we are. True righteousness, it's about approaching life and our faith with humility, with honesty about who we are, imperfections and all.
Makes you think about how sneaky pride can be, right? It's not always that in your face, look at me kind of thing. But how often do we get ourselves sizing other people up, feeling like we're a little bit better because of what we do, what we believe, even how moral we think we are?
All the time.
Yeah.
It's just part of being human, right? But these stories, this whole exploration of the seven deadly sins, it's an invitation to go deeper, to look inside and ask ourselves the tough questions.
Totally. It's not a checklist. It's about self-awareness. So, before we wrap up, what's the most important thing you want our listener to walk away with? What's the golden nugget here?
You know, I think it's this. These seven deadly sins, they're not just outdated religious rules. They're a reflection of who we are as humans. They show us where we're vulnerable, what trips us up, those patterns that lead us down the wrong path. But here's the thing, they don't define us. We have the power to choose something different, to cultivate those virtues, to live lives that are truly meaningful. That power, it's in each and every one of us.
That's a beautiful thought. And you know, it makes me think. It really does make you think. Because it's not like we figured this stuff out once and we're good, right? It's not like, okay, conquered envy, check. Moving on with my life.
Oh, absolutely not. It's a journey, right?
Yeah.
It's something we keep coming back to, growing, learning, stumbling.
Yeah.
Hopefully not too much stumbling. But yeah, it's a lifelong process. And one of the sources, I think it was the DLM Christian Lifestyle one, they said something that really stuck with me. They talked about how the key to overcoming sin is to live, act, and walk in the Spirit, and then you won't give into the flesh. It's like, yes, that's it.
It's that reminder that, like, we don't have to muscle our way through this alone. You
Yeah.
know, there's something bigger than us, some source of strength and guidance that we can tap into.
Exactly. And whether we call that the divine, or whether it's just tapping into that wellspring of human compassion and wisdom that's been around for centuries, that connection, it changes things. It empowers us to be better, to face those shadows within ourselves and say, no, I'm choosing a different path.
It's like that self-reflection we were talking about. It becomes less about judgment and more about like this incredible adventure with twists and turns and yeah, maybe some bumps in the road, but ultimately leading to something more.
And, you know, amidst all of that, even with the challenges, even when we mess up, there's still so much beauty to be found. It's in those moments of vulnerability, when we acknowledge both the good and the bad within ourselves, that we often find our greatest strength. That's where the real growth happens.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the seven deadly sins, is there like one last thought, one key takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
You know, if there's one thing I hope people remember, it's that these seven sins, they might sound scary, they might sound ancient and outdated, but they're really just reflections of us. They're part of what it means to be human. They highlight our weaknesses, the things we struggle with, the places where we go astray, but they don't have the final say. We have the power to choose differently, to cultivate virtue, to live lives full of meaning and purpose. And that power, that's something no one can take away from us.
That's a beautiful note to end on. So to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some things to ponder, maybe some fresh perspectives on these age old concepts. And more than anything, we hope it's left you with a sense of hope, a sense of possibility as you navigate your own journey. Until next time, keep searching, keep striving, and keep exploring what it means to be